The Synod of Bishops wrapped up last month in Rome, and the Jubilee Year of Mercy is about to get underway in December. Will there be changes in store for the Church in the coming year? My next guest is here to discuss all of it and give us his thoughts on the recent terror attacks in Paris. He also has a new book, City of Saints, A Pilgrimage to St. John Paul's Krakow. It's a beautiful spiritual journey through the sainted Pope's Polish homeland. Here is my exclusive interview with author and theologian, George Weigel. George, I want to start with the book, City of Saints. This is really, you call it a pilgrimage to John Paul II's Krakow. I think of it as an illuminated travel guide to John Paul's hometown. And it's both his personal story, and it's really the whole Church's story in this little town. In
this remarkable city where the 20th century happened in a distinctive way. All of the awfulness of the 20th century, particularly the middle 20th century, the Second World War, the Holocaust, the Soviet experience, and yet here in this remarkable place, the answer to all of that was given in the revelations of divine mercy emanating from the heart of Christ. Experienced by the first saint of the 21st century, Sister Faustina. So with World Youth Day coming to Krakow next year, coming home in a sense, because that's where Wojtyła's youth ministry started.
Right.
I thought the way to introduce people to the city was through the life of its greatest son. So in addition to all of the usual guidebook stuff, the book is a spiritual pilgrimage, which I hope will help people.
Now, you really get the contours of his entire life, and this town brings them alive, and you can re-experience it by going there. Now, you embedded for a long time here, working on the biography, yes, right. Witness to Hope, but you do a seminar in Krakow every year.
I teach in Krakow every July. I generally spend most of July in Krakow and have done so for over 15 years. That and other lectures and whatnot at Krakowian universities have brought me to the city for what I think is now over a total of 2.5 years. Wow. If you add it all up. The people of the city have been immensely welcoming to me, as I'm sure they will be to the pilgrims of World Youth Day next year. So in a sense, this book is a thank you note to a place I consider my third home. And I hope it does justice to a remarkable place.
You had an earlier book that was released, I think, last year, and it was on the beautiful churches of Rome, the
Roman pilgrimage.
Pilgrimage churches. And you collaborated with your son, Stephen, on that book. He's back here, who took all these glorious pictures. What was it like working with him? Because I imagine you were a part of this, the photography of the book as well, yes?
It was great. It was a bit more intense than Roman pilgrimage. There we were in Rome together for 2 months because we did the Station Church pilgrimage day by day. Here, the photography had to be done in 3 weeks flat.
Wow.
So we were at it every day in a very intense way with some great help as our logistics manager from the man who was John Paul II's first altar boy, who is now one of the world's most distinguished high-energy particle physicists and a great friend of mine, Piotr Maletsky, who drove us all around so we could get this job done. So it stretched from you have a stretch of people from Karol Wojtyła's
life,
early priesthood, to the post-John Paul II period, bringing this book together.
Beautiful. What do you want people to come away with as they read this? Many people who will never visit Krakow.
I hope they get an experience of how embedded, how gritty Catholicism is. Catholicism is about space as well as time. It's an incarnational faith, and it's alive in this remarkable city in a way that is really quite unique. So I hope people are able to experience the city, the history, the man, John Paul II, again, through this effort to provide pilgrims for World Youth Day with a guidebook.
While I have you here, I have to get into some other issues. I know you were obsessively covering the Synod on the Family in Rome.
Intensively.
Okay, intensely. Your takeaway from that. My thought is, just looking at this, the Church Fathers obviously went in one direction. They reaffirmed church teaching largely. And you have another faction Many Jesuits close to the Pope saying there's an opening here for divorced and remarried Catholics. It seems the Pope in the Year of Mercy wants to provide some sort of gesture to this group of people. Do you see that? Do you think that's what's in the offer?
I have no idea what's in the Holy Father's mind. I think the facts of the matter are that the Synod reaffirmed the Church's understanding of the Eucharist, of the sacramental life, of the nature of marriage. The talk in the famous paragraph 85 of the final report, which I may say is a massive improvement over the working document for the Synod, which we discussed months ago. The famous paragraph 85 anchors this discernment in the internal forum, to use the technical language, in, quote, according to the teaching of the Church. Those 7 words are absolutely crucial. They were inserted in at the last minute. I discuss all of this in an article that'll be available in early December in First Things called What Really Happened at Synod 2015, and perhaps your viewers might want to be aware of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's talk for a moment about something the Pope said the other day.
Right.
He was talking, it was an interfaith prayer gathering with Lutherans, and a Lutheran woman gets up and says, when am I going to be able to share the Eucharist with my Catholic husband? And the Pope said, go to the Lord, pray, and then essentially go your way. And he said, this is the quote, there aren't differences between us and doctrine becomes the same. Doctrine, he said, is a difficult word to understand, but I ask myself, don't we share the same baptism? How do you read that? What should people interpret there?
I read the whole episode as an attempt by, as quite probably an attempt, by certain German churchmen to relitigate a case they lost at the Synod. The working document for the Synod included a paragraph number 128, which was an open invitation to intercommunion, which frankly is an insult to Lutherans. It suggests to them that they may believe something that they don't believe. That was knocked out of the box completely during the language group discussions at the Synod. It was just flatly rejected. There's no hint of it in the final report. And I would be very interested to know if that question was planted through that lady, taking advantage of her situation in order to relitigate a case that had already been lost.
There is a distinction too, George, and it's very hard, both for journalists and for the general public, because they hear the Pope say something, and to distinguish the Pope's utterances from church teaching is very difficult for them. What is the difference?
The Pope was responding on the spur of the moment to someone in distress. The settled teaching of the Catholic Church on the circumstances in which a non-Catholic may receive Holy Communion at Mass are laid out quite clearly in the Catechism. I would refer people to that.
I want to touch on Regensburg, the Regensburg Address, the famous, now seemingly prophetic speech of the Holy Father, Pope Benedict. You wrote a book called The Cube and the Cathedral around the same time. Tell me about, looking back on this, and what was in that book, and what Pope Benedict said. What didn't we understand, and what should we revisit now?
Well, I think what Western European elites and political leaders have never understood is that you cannot defend Western civilization from the assault of jihadist Islam unless you are prepared to defend the superiority of Western political life to the caliphate. This refusal to man up and say, no, I'm sorry, this way of doing the public business is morally superior to the kind of stuff we see going on in Syria and Iraq today, is the absolute precondition to any form of successful address to this problem, either on the ground in Syria and Iraq or in dealing with these immigrant populations. But the tyranny of self-flagellation that has gone on in Western civilization for the past 50 years is making it virtually impossible for it to defend itself.
Does the Church have a role in engaging Islam? Because contrary to what we're hearing out there, there is a link between Islam and these jihadi actions. This isn't, the Presbyterians aren't doing this.
No.
Or the Mormons. There's something in the in the belief that's fueling the ideology.
To go back to Regensburg, Pope Benedict absolutely correctly identified the two issues that have to be resolved inside the House of Islam for it to be able to live with the non-Islamic world. One is Islam has to find a way within its own religious self-understanding to underwrite religious tolerance, and it has to find a way within its own self-understanding to distinguish between spiritual and political authority. As long as Islam remains, particularly this activist part, this jihadist part, beholden to a 7th century view of these questions, it is going to be a very dangerous thing, and that has to be resisted.
Before I let you go, Thanksgiving is upon us. What are you most thankful for this year, George Weigel?
I think we should all, in light of Paris, be thankful for the gift of freedom. This will be the theme of my Catholic Press column next week. But we also have to understand what is inscribed on the Korean War Veterans Memorial a few miles from where we're sitting here in Washington. Freedom is never free, and freedom has to be lived nobly if it's going to be defended successfully.
Very good, George Weigel. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Raymond.
George Weigel's new book, City of Saints, A Pilgrimage to John Paul II's Krakow, is available at bookstores everywhere and online and through EWTN's religious catalog.